Hi fans. Today I'm on the corner of E Street and 9th Avenue in downtown Anchorage at a place known as the Park Strip. And here on the Park Strip on display is 557's sister, 556. So I'm going to take you around so you can get some good broadside views of her, and there's a lovely little text that I'm going to read to you. Kind of give you a little bit of a tour of this locomotive. So 556 was retired, I believe, in between 1956 and 1958, and was put on display in 1959. She is indeed one of the 2,100 plus USATC S-160 consolidations built for the war effort of World War II, and one of 12 that came to Alaska. And as you can see, she's fitted with her snowplow, which was common on many Alaska Railroad steam locomotives of the era. A few years ago, she received a bit of a spiffing up, and she has this gate, this fence put around. Her boiler jacket has been removed since it was a asbestos abatement that happened. So all the asbestos was removed, including the boiler jacket. The tender is not the original USATC tender that would have accompanied 556. It's either a tender that was used with the Mikados, the 700 class Mikados, or quite possibly a tender that came from either 751 or 752, the ex-Northern Pacific Mikados that were here for a short time during World War II. In 1947, many steam locomotives were sent to scrap, including the last of the Panama Moguls. So it's safe to assume that this tender may have come from one of those scrapped locomotives. A few years ago, when the abatement was going on, some volunteers from the 557 Restoration Company came out here, and they were able to obtain some needed parts for the restoration of 557, and they were able to fabricate some parts, some stand-in parts for the display. And at one point in time, you used to be able to climb all over this locomotive, but as you can see with this fence here, you can no longer do that. And this was in part of the fact that homeless people and vandals have vandalized and done some damage to this locomotive. And I'm going to take you over here to this little display, and I'm going to show you this little text here that was done by the 557 Restoration Company. And there's the 556 right here in service. Just by seeing one little detail just above the coupler, I can see that this is Anchorage. There's one of the 700 class Mikados, that's 702. And if you look, there is a train in the background here, and that would be a Tanana Valley Railroad narrow gauge train. It's actually a bit of a famous photograph of a train going over one of the many high trestles they had. So I'm going to read you now this text. Number 556 was built in 1943 by the Baldwin Locomotive Works in Pennsylvania. Thousands of these 280 consolidation locomotives were assembled in America for war service in Europe and Africa. They were stripped down for war action and acquired the nickname Gypsy Rose Lee locomotives after the famous striptease burlesque entertainer. Instead of being shipped abroad, 12 of the consolidation locomotives were sent to Alaska by the U.S. Army to become Alaska Railroad 550 class. All 12 locomotives saw service over the 460 miles of the Alaska Railroad. For 13 years, number 556 hauled passengers and freight from Seward through Anchorage and on to Fairbanks. Number 556's service life wasn't without a little drama. On January 1st, 1951, AR numbers 559 and 556 were double heading on a freight train. Shortly after leaving Seward, both 559 in the lead and 556 derailed due to ice in the flangeways at a grade crossing. 559 remained upright, but 556 rolled on her side and down a small embankment. Fortunately, the damage was minor and she was quickly returned to operation. A more serious incident occurred during the Anchorage roundhouse fire of 1951. Initially considered to be damaged beyond repair, it took approximately 1 year before 556 was returned to operation. In 1959, number 556 was taken out of storage and moved to its present location, where it served as an object of play for 5 generations of Anchorage youngsters before becoming a preserved educational display. Here is some of the specs right here. And here's another little display piece right here. Number 556, an S-160 class locomotive, was one of the 2,120 locomotives built for the U.S. Army in 1944. They lacked the typical steam engine domes because many were sent to Europe, where the bridges and tunnels were much lower than in America. Their short driving wheels meant these engines had a lot of pulling power but not much speed. They also had good traction on steep mountain grades. In one day, traveling only 120 miles, 556 could burn 10,000 pounds of coal, all of which was shoveled into the firebox by the firemen. The engine would also consume an average of 15,000 gallons of water a day, which meant stopping 3 or 4 times to top off its 6,500 gallon tank. These amounts varied depending on weather conditions, the train's load, the track grade, and the engineer. The early steam engines, including old 556, were hand bombers, engines fired by hand. The later steam engines were equipped with stokers, which had a steam-driven screw that fed coal into the fire. Coal, water, and sand were available at different section stations along the line. There was a designated place for the firemen to deposit the ashes at all the water stops. There's a nice drawing by Shannon Cartwright of 556 at one of those water stops. And as you can see, there's a little chimney and smoke coming out of the top of that water tower. That's because back in the day, there used to be a large stove fed by coal that the stack would run up through the center of the water tower, and that kept the water from freezing in the wintertime. And here's another drawing that shows how a steam engine works. So this kind of gives you an idea of what the old 556 used to look like and what it used to do. And one of these years here soon, 557 will be on the main and all around Alaska traveling around, and she looks a little bit like this. Yeah, I hope you like a little tour of the 556 here at the Park Strip.